What does it take to cross a line that cannot be uncrossed? Not in the heat of a moment. Not in the chaos of a close game, when emotions run high and words are exchanged before the mind can catch up with the mouth. But deliberately. Quietly. With planning and intention behind every step. That is the question now sitting at the center of one of the most disturbing stories to emerge from professional baseball in recent memory. A scheme, not an incident, not a flare-up, not a misunderstanding, but a deliberate, coordinated scheme, specifically designed to harm Shohei Ohtani. And at the center of it, shockingly, was not a rival player or an outside figure. It was a coach from the Los Angeles Angels. The consequences have been swift. The reaction across the league has been severe. And the full truth of what was planned, and how close it came to actually succeeding, is only now beginning to surface. When it does, nothing about how you see this story will remain the same. There are stories that arrive gradually, small details accumulating over time until the full picture finally becomes clear. And then there are stories that break all at once, like something that has been under pressure for too long finally giving way. This was the second kind. When the news first emerged that an Angels coach had been implicated in a scheme targeting Ohtani, the immediate reaction across the baseball world was disbelief. Not because the sport is unfamiliar with controversy. Not because anyone believes professional sports exist in a bubble of perfect integrity. But because of the specific nature of what was alleged, and because of who the target was. Shohei Ohtani is not simply the most famous baseball player on the planet right now. He is, by almost any reasonable measure, the most carefully watched, most publicly documented, most universally admired athlete in the sport's modern era. The idea that someone inside a professional organization would look at that man and see not a colleague, not a competitor to be defeated on the field, but a target, was something that stopped people mid-sentence. And yet the evidence, as it has continued to emerge, leaves very little room for alternative interpretation. The scheme was real. The intent was deliberate. And the Angels coach at the center of it is now facing consequences that will define the remainder of his career, and possibly end it entirely. It is important to note something before going further. The significance of this story is not simply about one individual's actions. It is about what those actions reveal, about the culture surrounding Ohtani, about the resentments his success has quietly generated, and about the responsibility that organizations carry when it comes to protecting their players and the players they compete against. The coach in question had spent years inside the Angels organization. He was not a peripheral figure. He was not someone operating from the outside looking in. He had access. He had relationships. He understood the rhythms of the game at the professional level, the schedules, the routines, the patterns that define how a Major League Baseball player moves through his days. And it was precisely that knowledge that made the scheme so dangerous. Because targeting Ohtani randomly would have been impossible. His security, his team infrastructure, and the general protective apparatus that surrounds any athlete of his profile make casual interference extremely difficult. What the scheme required, and what this coach apparently provided, was inside understanding. Knowledge of timing. Knowledge of access points. Knowledge that only comes from years of operating within the professional baseball world. That is what makes this not just a story about one bad actor. It is a story about a system that allowed that actor to operate without detection for long enough to make a plan real. The key here is not the dramatic moment of exposure, though that moment came. It is the thread that eventually led investigators and league officials to the full picture. Like most carefully hidden intentions, this one left traces. Small inconsistencies. Conversations that seemed harmless in isolation but formed a pattern when examined together. Communications that, when reviewed, told a story that no innocent explanation could adequately cover. Those who first became aware that something was wrong described a feeling of unease that built gradually before crystallizing into certainty. There were questions about certain decisions. Questions about access. Questions about the specific nature of information that had been shared in ways that seemed, at first, merely unusual, and later, clearly deliberate. When those threads were pulled, the full picture began to emerge. League officials were notified. An internal review was initiated. And as that review expanded, pulling in communications, interviews, and documentation that the coach apparently believed would never be examined, the scheme revealed itself in a level of detail that removed all ambiguity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not professional jealousy expressing itself through poor judgment in an unguarded moment. This was a plan. It had components. It had a timeline. And it had a specific human being at its center, Shohei Ohtani, as the intended victim. The moment that became undeniable, the consequences began. When the Dodgers organization was made fully aware of the details of what had been uncovered, the response was immediate and unambiguous. This is a team that has spent the past several years building something that goes beyond a roster of talented players. The culture inside that clubhouse, the standards that Dave Roberts has established and that the organization's leadership has reinforced, centers on a simple but non-negotiable principle. The people inside this organization look after each other. Not as a policy. Not as a talking point. As a lived reality. And when one of their own is the target of something this deliberate and this dangerous, that culture activates in a way that is impossible to miss. The Dodgers did not release a carefully worded statement that acknowledged the situation while maintaining strategic distance. They made their position clear. Ohtani is protected. Ohtani is supported. And anyone who moves against him, from whatever direction, with whatever intention, will find the full weight of this organization standing in their way. Dave Roberts, specifically, has been described by those close to the situation as deeply, personally angered by what was revealed. Not in the way that a manager gets angry about a lost game or a poor performance. In the way that a person gets angry when something fundamentally wrong has been done to someone they are responsible for. That distinction matters. Because it tells you something about the relationship between this coaching staff and this player that no statistics can measure. Here is where the story requires a moment of pause. Because to fully understand the weight of what was attempted, you need to understand the world that Ohtani inhabits every single day. Since arriving in the major leagues, Ohtani has existed under a level of scrutiny that has no real precedent in the sport's history. Every game. Every at-bat. Every press conference conducted across 2 languages with the patience and precision of someone who understands that his words carry weight in multiple cultures simultaneously. He handles it with a composure that his closest observers consistently describe as extraordinary. Not performed. Not manufactured for public consumption. But genuinely internalized, the product of years of deliberate self-discipline that began long before he became the figure he is today. But composure is not the same as imperviousness. Ohtani is a human being. He has people he trusts. He has routines that sustain him. He has a relationship with his preparation and his performance that is deeply personal, carefully constructed, and entirely dependent on an environment of stability and safety. What the Angels coach's scheme attempted to do, whether it succeeded fully or was intercepted before its worst consequences could materialize, was reach into that environment and disrupt it. Deliberately. With full awareness of what it might cost. That is not competitive behavior. That is not the expression of professional rivalry within the accepted norms of the sport. That is something else entirely. And the fact that it came from inside the professional baseball world, from someone with the knowledge and access that only years in the industry provides, makes it more serious, not less. Swift. That is the word most consistently used by those with knowledge of how the league has responded to what was uncovered. The Angels coach is facing consequences that operate on multiple levels simultaneously. At the professional level, the damage to his career is, by all available indications, irreversible. The nature of what was planned, and the deliberateness with which it was planned, makes any path back into a position of organizational trust essentially impossible to construct. At the league level, officials have made clear that the review of this situation is thorough and ongoing. The documentation gathered in the course of the investigation is extensive. And the standards being applied to the evaluation of what occurred are being set with a specific awareness that the outcome of this case will establish precedent. That last point deserves emphasis. Because the league understands something that individual reactions to individual incidents sometimes obscure. The message sent by the consequences in a case like this is not just a message to the person facing those consequences. It is a message to every person inside every organization across the sport about what is acceptable and what is not. If the consequences are proportional to the seriousness of what occurred, and by all indications, the league intends them to be, then that message will be unmistakable. Planning to harm another player is not a gray area. It is not a matter of interpretation. It is a line that the sport does not permit to be crossed. And crossing it comes with a cost that no career can absorb without permanent damage. Step back from the specific details of this incident for a moment. Step back from the coach, the scheme, the investigation, the consequences. And look at the broader picture that all of it paints. Shohei Ohtani plays baseball at a level that generates reactions in other people that most of us will never fully understand. Not just admiration, though admiration is certainly present, and genuine, and widespread. But also something more complicated. Something that lives in the space between watching greatness and being confronted, daily, by the distance between that greatness and your own position. For most people, that feeling resolves itself in healthy ways. In motivation. In appreciation. In the simple human experience of being moved by something extraordinary. But for some, it does not resolve cleanly. It curdles into something else. Into resentment. Into a need to diminish what cannot be equaled. Into a willingness, in extreme cases, to reach beyond the boundaries of legitimate competition and attempt to harm what cannot be beaten. That is what this incident, at its deepest level, is about. Not baseball. Not a coach. Not the Angels organization. But the complex, sometimes destructive relationship between extraordinary achievement and the people who find themselves unable to simply let it exist. Ohtani did not ask to generate those reactions. He simply kept doing the work, the daily, disciplined, unglamorous work of being the best version of himself that his preparation and his talent allow. That work, that consistency, that refusal to be anything less than what he is capable of being, that is what made him a target. And that, ultimately, is why the consequences for the coach responsible must be as serious as the scheme itself. The investigation continues. The consequences are unfolding. And the baseball world is watching, not just to see what happens to one coach at one organization, but to understand what the sport is willing to say, clearly and without qualification, about the safety and dignity of its players. Ohtani will continue to play. He will continue to prepare with the same meticulous care that has defined his entire career. He will continue to carry the expectations of millions of people across 2 continents with the quiet grace that has become his signature. He will not speak extensively about this publicly. He rarely does about anything that touches the more personal dimensions of his experience. But the people around him, his teammates, his manager, the organization that brought him to Los Angeles with a commitment that was always about more than the number on his contract, they will remember this. And the way they respond, the standard they hold, and the protection they provide will say everything about who they are. The Dodgers have already shown, in the days since this story broke, that they understand the assignment. That they take it personally. That the circle they form around Ohtani is not symbolic. It is real. It is firm. And it is not going anywhere. The Angels coach who believed otherwise is now learning, in the most consequential way possible, exactly how wrong that assumption was. Some lessons in professional baseball are learned on the field. This one was learned somewhere else entirely. And it will not be forgotten.